The airport was busy that morning. People were rushing with their bags, some running to catch flights while others stood in long lines. Among the travelers was a man named David. He was tall, calm, and dressed in a neat black suit. He carried only a small leather bag and a phone in his hand. He did not look like someone in a hurry, though his flight was boarding soon. David was used to traveling. He had taken flights almost every week for years because of his work. He was the head of a growing company, and business meetings often called him to different cities and countries. Yet he always stayed humble. He never showed off his success, and he never liked to make others feel small. To anyone who saw him that morning, he looked like just another passenger. As he walked through the gate and entered the plane, he noticed the first-class cabin. The seats were wider, more comfortable, and spaced out. He smiled politely at the flight attendants and found his seat number on the ticket. It was a window seat in the first row. He had chosen it because he liked to look outside during takeoff and landing, but when David reached his seat, he stopped. A woman was already sitting there. She was dressed in a white jacket with a matching scarf. Her makeup was perfect and her hair was styled neatly. She had placed her handbag on the side and was adjusting her seatbelt as if she had been sitting there for a while. David checked his ticket again. There was no mistake. The number was clear. It was his seat. He looked at her calmly and spoke in a gentle tone. "Excuse me, I believe this is my seat," he said. The woman looked up at him quickly. Her face showed a flicker of surprise, but she didn't move. Instead, she gave a short laugh and shook her head. "This is my seat," she replied, sounding sure of herself. "You must be mistaken." David showed her the ticket politely. "It says here 1A, that's this seat." The woman frowned, then looked at the ticket in his hand. For a moment she seemed unsure, but then she leaned back and crossed her arms. "Well, I'm already sitting here. Maybe you can ask for another seat in business class. I'm sure they will find something for you." Her voice carried a tone of confidence, almost like she expected him to agree and walk away. Passengers nearby had started to notice the exchange. A few turned their heads, pretending not to listen but clearly curious. David remained calm. He was not angry. He had been in situations before where people judged him quickly without knowing who he really was. He decided not to argue. Instead, he gave a small nod and stepped aside for the flight attendant who was coming down the aisle. "Is there a problem, sir?" the attendant asked kindly. David smiled and answered softly. "I think there is some confusion. My ticket says seat 1A, but the lady here is already seated." The flight attendant checked the ticket, then checked the list on her device. She looked at the woman and spoke politely but firmly. "Madam, this seat is reserved for Mr. David. May I see your boarding pass?" The woman's face froze. Her hand clutched her bag tightly as if she didn't want to take out her ticket. After a pause, she handed it over. The attendant scanned it and gave a quick nod. "Your seat is actually 3C, not 1A. For a second, the woman did not move. Her eyes shifted from the attendant to David. The confidence in her expression slowly faded, replaced by embarrassment. She had assumed something that was not true. David stood silently, not pressuring her, not raising his voice. He was patient. He knew that sometimes people acted out of pride, and giving them time to realize their mistake was better than forcing them. The woman finally stood up, adjusting her scarf as she did. She tried to smile as if nothing had happened. "Oh, I must have misread it. How silly of me." The attendant helped her find her correct seat, and David quietly sat down in his place by the window. He placed his bag neatly under the seat and leaned back. He did not look upset. Instead, he opened his phone and started checking some notes for his upcoming meeting. But inside, the woman felt unsettled. She had been so quick to take the seat and even quicker to assume that David was the one in the wrong. Now she wondered why he had stayed so calm and confident through the whole situation. Something about him felt different, but she couldn't explain it yet. And she had no idea that before this flight landed, she would discover something about him that would leave her completely frozen in shock. The airplane slowly began to fill with the rest of the passengers. People were putting their bags into the overhead compartments, adjusting their seats and settling in for the long journey. The hum of voices mixed with the soft announcements from the crew. David sat quietly by the window, his hands resting calmly on his lap. He was not thinking about the small incident that had just taken place. For him, it was a simple matter, not worth wasting energy on. He was focused on the work he needed to review before his meeting after landing. But the woman in the white jacket, whose name was Clara, could not forget what had happened. She sat in her new seat 2 rows back, but her mind kept going back to the moment she had been asked to move. Her cheeks still felt warm from embarrassment. She wondered why she had reacted so quickly, and why she had assumed the seat was hers without checking properly. Clara glanced forward. From where she sat, she could see the back of David's head and his broad shoulders resting calmly against the seat. He did not look like a man who had been bothered by her behavior. That puzzled her. Many people would have argued or raised their voice. But he had not. His silence carried a kind of strength that made her curious. The flight took off smoothly. The view outside the windows changed from the ground to clouds. Passengers relaxed, ordered drinks, or opened books. David opened his laptop and began typing notes. The glow from the screen lit his calm face. A flight attendant approached him with a polite smile. "Mr. David, would you like your usual drink?" she asked softly. Clara's eyes widened when she heard that. Usual drink? Did that mean he traveled with this airline often enough for the staff to know his preferences? She leaned forward slightly, trying to listen without making it obvious. "Yes, please. Just water for now," David replied gently. The attendant nodded with respect, almost as if she knew him personally. She soon returned with a glass of water placed neatly on a tray. Clara sipped her own drink, but her thoughts kept circling. Who exactly was this man? She had mistaken him for just another passenger. But now she was beginning to realize that perhaps he was someone important. The way the staff treated him suggested more than simple recognition. An hour into the flight, the captain made an announcement about expected smooth weather and the time of arrival. Afterward, the cabin became quiet. Some passengers closed their eyes to rest. Others watched movies. Clara found herself unable to focus on anything else. She kept thinking about the way she had dismissed him earlier. Finally, she gathered some courage and stood up, pretending to stretch. Slowly, she walked down the aisle and paused near his row. She leaned slightly, her voice polite. "Excuse me, I just wanted to apologize for earlier. I didn't mean to cause any trouble. I was tired and I thought it was my seat." David looked up at her. His eyes were calm, not harsh. He gave a small smile. "It's all right. No trouble at all. Traveling can be tiring." Clara was surprised again. No bitterness, no sign of anger. Just calm acceptance. For a moment, she didn't know what else to say. She nodded and went back to her seat, feeling both relieved and even more curious. As the hours passed, Clara noticed something else. Whenever a flight attendant came by, they addressed David respectfully, almost as if they were serving a higher guest. They asked if he needed anything extra, and he always replied politely, never demanding or arrogant. At one point, a man from business class walked up the aisle, stopped by David's seat and greeted him warmly. They spoke briefly about business matters, and then the man returned to his section. This small interaction made Clara's curiosity grow stronger. She sat back and thought to herself, who was he? Why did the staff know him? Why did other passengers treat him with respect? And why did he carry himself with such quiet confidence? Clara realized she had judged too quickly earlier, and that thought bothered her. She wondered if she would ever find out more about him before the flight ended. What she did not know was that fate had already planned it. Very soon, an announcement and a simple conversation would reveal David's true identity in a way that would leave her completely silent. The airplane continued to move smoothly above the clouds. The cabin lights were dimmed as many passengers began to rest. Some leaned their heads against the windows, while others closed their eyes and pulled blankets over themselves. The soft hum of the engines filled the quiet space. David remained at his seat, his laptop resting on the small table in front of him. He was reading through documents and making small notes. His focus was steady, his face calm. Even while traveling, he used his time wisely. Clara sat 2 rows behind him, restless. She had tried to close her eyes and sleep, but her thoughts kept circling back to the man in the first row. She had never seen anyone like him before. It was not about his clothes or his seat. It was the way he carried himself. Calm, patient, and respectful, yet people seemed to treat him with unusual regard. She thought about the flight attendants. They had spoken to him as if they knew him well, as if he were more than just a regular traveler. And then there was the businessman from earlier who had stopped to greet him. That had not been a casual greeting. It had been one of respect, maybe even admiration. Clara began to feel curious in a way she had not expected. She wanted to know who David really was. She wondered if it would be rude to ask. She thought about their small exchange when she apologized earlier. His kindness had surprised her. He had not acted upset, even though she had taken his seat and spoken to him so firmly. Time passed slowly. The cabin crew began to serve the meal. Trays were placed in front of each passenger with warm food, drinks, and bread rolls. When Clara received hers, she glanced toward the front. She noticed that David had received the same meal, but with an extra plate of fruit and a small handwritten card tucked beside his tray. Clara blinked in surprise. She had never seen that before. Passengers usually received the same standard service. She quietly whispered to the attendant serving her, "Excuse me, does he fly with you often?" The attendant smiled but kept her voice soft. "Yes, ma'am. Mr. David is very well known to our airline." That answer made Clara's curiosity grow even more. She wanted to ask more questions, but she decided not to push. She simply nodded and thanked the attendant. While eating, Clara kept thinking, could he be some kind of diplomat? Or maybe a famous businessman? She did not recognize him as a celebrity, but there was definitely something special about him. She felt embarrassed remembering how she had insisted on keeping his seat earlier. If she had known who he was, she would never have behaved that way. After the meal, the lights were lowered again, and many passengers tried to rest. Clara, however, could not. She took out a notebook from her bag and began scribbling thoughts, but her mind was distracted. Her eyes kept drifting toward David. Then something happened that caught her attention even more. A flight attendant leaned down to speak quietly to David. The conversation was short, but Clara saw the attendant give a respectful nod before walking away. A few minutes later, the captain himself came out of the cockpit. He walked directly to David's seat, shook his hand warmly, and spoke to him for a few minutes. Clara could not hear the words, but she saw the friendly smile on the captain's face. Other passengers also noticed, whispering among themselves. It was not every day that the captain left the cockpit to greet a passenger personally. Clara's curiosity was now stronger than ever. She leaned back in her seat, her mind racing with questions. Who was this man? Why was he treated with so much respect? And how had she not realized it earlier? She thought about asking him directly, but she hesitated. It did not feel right to walk up and ask about his life. Yet something inside told her that she would soon find out anyway. As the plane continued through the night sky, Clara realized she was waiting for a moment. A moment when his identity would no longer be a mystery. A moment when she would finally understand why he seemed to hold such quiet power. And that moment was not far away. The airplane had now reached its steady height, gliding smoothly above the endless sea of clouds. The cabin was calm, the hum of the engine steady like background music. Some passengers were lost in movies, others in sleep, but Clara sat wide awake, her mind spinning with questions about the man in the front row. David, as usual, looked perfectly at peace. His laptop was now closed, and he had leaned slightly against the window. He wasn't sleeping, but simply gazing outside, as if the clouds themselves were keeping him company. There was something almost poetic about him. The kind of calm presence that made people curious without him saying a single word. Clara shifted in her seat. She couldn't help herself. She whispered to the passenger sitting beside her, a friendly elderly woman with kind eyes. "Excuse me, do you know who that gentleman is in the first row?" The older woman smiled knowingly. "Oh, you mean the quiet one with the calm face? Yes, I've seen him before on flights. He travels often. People say he's very important, though he never shows it. Always polite, always respectful." Clara nodded, her curiosity only growing. The words "very important" echoed in her mind. She felt as if she had accidentally walked into a mystery novel, only this time she was a character in the story. Another hour passed, and the crew began to prepare the passengers for a mid-flight announcement. The captain's voice came over the speakers, warm and professional. "Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you for flying with us today. We hope you are comfortable. As always, we extend our gratitude to our special guests traveling with us." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Special guests?" She immediately glanced at David, and sure enough, the flight attendant's eyes subtly shifted toward him with admiration. Clara nearly dropped her cup of tea. Her thoughts were racing. Meanwhile, David adjusted his seatbelt and smiled faintly. He knew this kind of attention often puzzled people. He had never been one to show off his position, yet his presence alone seemed to reveal it slowly, like a secret everyone wanted to discover. A young man seated across the aisle finally broke the silence. He leaned forward, clearly curious like Clara. "Excuse me, sir," he said politely to David. I couldn't help but notice the crew seems to know you well. Do you work for the airline? The question made a few nearby passengers turn their heads, waiting for the answer. Clara held her breath without realizing it. David's lips curved into a small, amused smile. He shook his head gently. Not exactly, but I do know this airline very well. The young man looked puzzled but didn't push further. David's answer was polite yet vague, like a puzzle piece without a picture. Clara leaned back, almost groaning inside. She was both frustrated and intrigued. The elderly woman beside her chuckled softly. Patience, dear, she whispered to Clara. Some stories reveal themselves when the time is right. Like tea, you cannot rush the flavor. Clara forced a polite smile, though inside she was burning with curiosity. She looked at David again, noticing how even when people asked about him, he never seemed defensive. Instead, he stayed gentle, as if he carried a secret but was in no hurry to reveal it. The rest of the flight moved peacefully. The crew dimmed the lights again and passengers prepared to rest. Clara, however, was awake, imagining all sorts of possibilities. Perhaps he was a government official, or maybe an investor with ties to aviation. Each guess felt more dramatic than the last. Finally, when the plane neared its destination, the crew made the usual landing announcements. But something unusual happened. The chief attendant came directly to David's seat. She leaned down and spoke with a respect that could not be hidden. Mr. David, once we land, the ground staff will be ready to escort you personally as always. The words hung in the air. Passengers nearby exchanged glances. Clara's mouth opened slightly, though no words came out. The mystery was only getting deeper. David gave a simple nod, his calm smile never leaving his face. Thank you. That will be fine. At that moment, Clara realized something with both excitement and a touch of dread. The truth she had been waiting for was coming closer, and when it finally arrived, it would not be small. It would be something grand enough to explain why an ordinary-looking passenger had quietly commanded the respect of an entire airline. And Clara knew one thing for sure. She would not be ready for it. The airplane began its slow descent. The lights inside the cabin brightened and the passengers stirred awake. Some stretched their arms, others fixed their hair, while a few hurried to finish their drinks before the trays were collected. The usual buzz of activity returned as the landing grew closer. David calmly closed his laptop and placed it neatly inside his leather bag. He adjusted his suit jacket and checked his watch as if everything was perfectly timed. His calmness stood out even more now when most passengers were rushing to organize their belongings. Clara felt her heartbeat quicken. She knew the journey was almost over, but her curiosity about him had only grown stronger. She kept remembering the words of the chief attendant. The ground staff will be ready to escort you personally, as always. That phrase replayed in her mind again and again. She leaned slightly toward the elderly woman beside her. Did you hear that? He has an escort waiting for him on the ground. The woman nodded with a knowing smile. Yes, my dear. I told you earlier he is not ordinary. Clara sighed, her curiosity turning into impatience. But who is he really? Why is everyone treating him like a special guest? The older woman chuckled softly. Perhaps you will soon find out. Surprises do not stay hidden forever. The plane touched down gently on the runway. A soft cheer came from a few passengers relieved to be back on the ground. The cabin filled with the sound of seatbelts unbuckling and overhead bins opening. People were eager to leave, but the attendants politely reminded everyone to wait until the doors opened. Clara noticed something unusual. Instead of hurrying to get up, David remained seated. He was in no rush. In fact, the attendants seemed to wait for him. One of them quietly stood near his row as though prepared to guide him personally. When the doors finally opened, passengers began to step out, row by row. Clara walked slowly, pretending to look for her bag but really wanting to see what would happen with David. She stayed close behind him, curiosity pulling her forward. As they stepped into the airport hallway, Clara's eyes widened. A small group of staff members in smart uniforms were already waiting near the gate. The moment they saw David, their expressions lit up with respect. Two of them quickly approached and greeted him warmly. "Welcome back, Mr. David," one of them said. "Your car is ready outside. We have also prepared the private lounge in case you'd like to rest before leaving." Clara nearly stumbled when she heard that. Private lounge? Car ready? This was not treatment for an ordinary businessman. This was something entirely different. David nodded politely, thanking them with his usual calm smile. He turned to collect his bag, but before walking ahead, his eyes briefly met Clara's. For a moment, she froze. She did not know what to say. She wanted to ask questions, but words stuck in her throat. David simply gave a small nod of acknowledgement, as if saying he remembered her. Then he followed the staff members down the special lane that was blocked off from other passengers. Clara stood in the crowd, stunned. She heard whispers around her. Other travelers were asking the same question that burned in her mind. "Who is he?" one man asked. "He must be someone powerful," another guessed. Clara walked slowly toward baggage claim, still in a daze. She kept replaying every detail of the flight, the way he stayed calm when she took his seat, the respect from the crew, the captain shaking his hand, and now the escort waiting at the airport. Her pride from earlier had completely disappeared. Instead, she felt a strange mix of embarrassment and admiration. She realized she had judged him too quickly, and now the truth was hanging just out of reach. As she waited for her suitcase, she overheard two employees nearby whispering. They were part of the airport staff who had seen David leave. "Did you see him?" one said. "That's the CEO himself." Clara's head snapped up. Her eyes widened as she listened more carefully. "Yes," the other replied. "The CEO and owner of this airline. He always travels with us, but he never shows off. He's very private, very humble. But everyone here knows who he is." Clara stood frozen. The words hit her like a wave. Owner, CEO, airline. Suddenly, everything made sense. The treatment, the respect, the private arrangements. She took a deep breath, her mind racing. The man whose seat she had tried to claim was not just any traveler. He was the very person who owned the plane she was flying on. Her face warmed with embarrassment once again, but this time it was mixed with something else. Awe. She whispered to herself, almost in disbelief. He owns this airline, and in that moment, Clara knew she would never forget the quiet man in the black suit, who had carried such power without ever raising his voice. Clara stood at the baggage claim, still holding the handle of her suitcase, but her thoughts were far from the moving belt. She kept hearing the staff's words again and again. The CEO and owner of the airline. She had sat in his seat, argued with him, and even told him to look for another place. The memory made her cheeks burn. The more she thought about it, the stranger it felt. He had every reason to correct her, every right to point out her mistake firmly, but he had not done so. Instead, he had stayed calm, patient, even gentle. That was what surprised her the most. People with power often used it to remind others of their importance, but David had not. Passengers around her grabbed their luggage and walked away, but Clara was still frozen in thought. She wanted to see him again, not just to apologize, but to understand him better. How could someone so powerful choose to remain so quiet? Just as she collected her bag, she noticed movement at the corner of the baggage hall. The same uniformed staff members were walking toward the private exit with David in the middle. He was not walking fast. His pace was steady, relaxed, as if he had no need to rush. Clara hesitated. Should she approach him? Her pride whispered that she should simply leave and never bring up her embarrassment again. But another voice inside her urged her forward. If she walked away now, she would regret it. Gathering her courage, she wheeled her suitcase toward the private lane. Of course, she could not enter. The staff blocked the way politely. But just as she stood there, David happened to glance back. His eyes met hers again, calm and steady as always. For a second, Clara froze. Then she spoke softly, her voice almost trembling. "I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were." David paused, the faintest smile touching his lips. He stepped a little closer, though the staff waited respectfully behind him. His voice was gentle. "You don't need to apologize again. A seat is just a seat. What matters is how we treat each other." Clara blinked at his words. Simple yet powerful. She nodded slowly, still embarrassed but also strangely relieved. David gave a polite nod in return. "Safe travels, miss." Then he turned back and walked toward the waiting car, disappearing from sight within moments. Clara stood there for a while, her suitcase still beside her. She felt as if she had just learned an important lesson, though she couldn't fully describe it. She realized that true confidence didn't need to shout, and true success didn't need to show off. Later that evening, Clara sat in her hotel room replaying the entire day. She thought about her first impression of him, the way she had dismissed him so quickly, Then she compared it to what she had discovered later, the owner of the very airline she was flying with. The contrast was almost unbelievable. She opened her notebook, the same one she had scribbled in during the flight, and began writing. Sometimes people are not who we think they are. The quiet man sitting beside us could be carrying more power than we imagine. But the greatest strength is in kindness. As she wrote, she felt a smile tug at her lips. For the first time, instead of embarrassment, she felt respect. She admired the way David had handled the situation. He had not exposed her mistake to the whole cabin. He had not used his title to embarrass her. He had simply stayed calm and let the truth reveal itself naturally. Meanwhile, at the airport lounge, David sat in a private room, sipping tea while waiting for his car to be prepared. One of his assistants asked him politely, "Sir, would you like us to arrange more privacy on future flights to avoid such incidents?" David shook his head gently. "No need, these are small things. People make mistakes. What matters is how we respond." The assistant nodded respectfully, making a note. David leaned back, his expression calm as ever. For him, the world often judged on appearances, but he had long learned that staying true to himself mattered more than proving anything to anyone. And far away in her room, Clara closed her notebook with a quiet sigh. She did not know if she would ever see him again, but one thing was certain: she would never forget him. The next morning, Clara woke up feeling unusually thoughtful. She had replayed the flight in her mind many times, remembering every detail. The moment she had taken David's seat, his calm demeanor, and the quiet way he had shown respect to everyone around him. The memory still made her blush, but now it was mixed with admiration. She poured herself a cup of tea and sat by the window in her hotel room, watching the city slowly wake up. Her thoughts were not on sightseeing or business meetings. They were on David and what she had learned from him. For the first time, she realized that respect and humility could leave a stronger impression than power or status ever could. Clara thought about her own life. She had always been proud of her achievements, but she had also been quick to judge people based on appearances, taking David's seat without checking, assuming she was right. It was a small mistake, but it revealed a larger truth about herself. She had let pride guide her actions instead of patience and understanding. She picked up her notebook and began to write. "I judged too quickly. I assumed a stranger was ordinary, but I was wrong. True strength does not need to be loud. True success is not about showing off. Some of the most important people may appear ordinary, yet their influence is quiet, steady, and powerful." After writing for a while, Clara decided to take a walk outside. The streets were busy, people hurrying to their destinations, cars honking, shops opening. But she felt calmer than usual. Her encounter with David had given her a new perspective. She realized that power did not always need to be displayed, and kindness did not always need recognition. As she walked, she noticed small interactions around her. A shopkeeper helping an elderly customer with a heavy bag, a child holding the door for someone, a taxi driver giving directions patiently. Clara smiled to herself. Suddenly she could see how small acts of patience and respect could make a bigger difference than words or gestures meant to show authority. She thought back to the flight again. How David had handled the situation when she had argued over the seat. He had never shown annoyance, he had never raised his voice. He had simply allowed the truth to emerge naturally, letting her realize her mistake without embarrassment. That kind of quiet confidence, that was the kind of strength Clara wanted to learn from. By the time she returned to her hotel, Clara felt lighter. She realized that the experience had changed her perspective not only on David, but also on herself. She wanted to be more patient, more observant, and more humble in her actions. She wanted to treat people with the same respect David had shown her and others on the flight. That evening, she went out for a simple dinner at a small local cafe. She noticed how the staff treated each other and the customers. She smiled as she saw the way a server patiently explained the menu to a group of children, gently helping them choose what they wanted. Clara reflected on how small acts of kindness often went unnoticed but left a lasting impact, much like David's quiet presence on the plane. Back in her hotel room, Clara opened her notebook once more. She wrote down a thought that had been growing in her mind all day. The world can teach us lessons in unexpected ways. Sometimes a simple encounter with someone humble and wise can change the way we see ourselves and others. She closed her notebook and leaned back in her chair, feeling a sense of gratitude. She did not know if she would ever meet David again, but she understood now that the lessons she had learned from him were more valuable than any business advice or travel tip. His quiet strength and humility had left a mark on her, and she knew she would carry it with her always. Clara smiled softly and whispered to herself, "Some people don't need to show their power. You can see it in the way they live, the way they treat others, and the calm confidence they carry." And for the first time in a long while, Clara felt inspired not just by achievement but by the simple, quiet, powerful way one person could influence another without saying a word. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of the airport terminal. Clara walked slowly, her suitcase rolling quietly behind her. Today was the day she would return home, but she felt different than when she had arrived. Her encounter with David had left a lasting impression, and she found herself thinking about it at every step. As she approached the check-in counter, she noticed a small group of passengers being guided to a private boarding area. She glanced closer and her heart skipped a beat. There, standing calmly with the staff attending to him, was David. He looked just as composed as he had on the flight, calm, confident, and completely unhurried. Clara paused for a moment, unsure if she should approach. She felt nervous, but at the same time, she wanted to say something, not about the seat or the flight, but about what she had learned from him. She took a deep breath and slowly moved toward him, staying a respectful distance away. David noticed her and gave a small, polite nod. That simple gesture made Clara smile. She realized that she didn't need to explain herself or apologize again. She just needed to acknowledge the respect she now felt for him. "Good morning, sir," she said softly, her voice steady despite the nervousness in her chest. "I just wanted to thank you for everything on the flight. The way you handled things, the patience, the calmness. It taught me something important." David's eyes met hers, calm and kind. "Thank you," he replied simply. "Sometimes life gives us small lessons in unexpected ways. I'm glad it made a difference for you." Clara smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her. She realized that this short exchange meant more than words could describe. It wasn't just about learning manners or humility. It was about understanding that true strength came from how one treated others, quietly and consistently. The staff gently guided David toward the boarding area. He gave a small wave to Clara as he left. She watched him go, feeling a sense of closure and inspiration at the same time. For a moment, she thought about the seat she had taken, and how easily things could have turned into a conflict. But instead, it had turned into a lesson that would stay with her forever. Clara continued to her own boarding gate, her steps lighter than usual. She noticed small details in the terminal that she hadn't before. The way an employee helped a passenger with heavy luggage, the smiles exchanged between travelers, the quiet efficiency of the staff. Everything seemed connected now, like the small acts of respect she had witnessed from David had made her see the world differently. During the flight home, Clara found herself reflecting quietly. She thought about her past judgments, her impatience, and the times she had assumed she knew everything about people. She realized that humility, patience, and calm confidence could teach more than any lecture or book. And she understood that people like David, those who carry power quietly, inspire others not by showing off, but by simply living in a way that commands respect naturally. By the time she landed, Clara felt renewed. She retrieved her luggage and stepped into the sunlight outside the airport. The city felt brighter, the air fresher. She walked with purpose, but also with a sense of peace she had not felt before. Her encounter with David was more than a story about a seat on a plane. It was a story about human kindness, respect, and the quiet strength that can leave a lasting impact on those around us. As she hailed a taxi and looked back at the airport, she whispered softly to herself, "Some people don't need to show who they are. The way they live, the way they treat others, and the calm confidence they carry tells the story better than any words ever could." Clara smiled, thinking that she would carry this lesson with her for the rest of her life. And even though she might never see David again, she knew she would never forget the man who owned an airline but treated every person, stranger or staff, with patience, respect, and quiet strength. The taxi drove away, carrying Clara toward her life, but with a new understanding, a new perspective, and a story she would tell not to impress others, but to remind herself of what true respect and humility could achieve.